Okay, the first file we're going to open up is called range name. So if you click on C drive, the data folder, come over to the C folder, go to the data folder, go to the Excel 365-2 folder, and in this list you'll see a thing called range name. And that's the file we're going to open up first. Now range name has, looks like there's 4 quarters and an annual sheet. And so we're going to use this to kind of create some three-dimensional formulas in a few minutes. But let's start off with our range name. So I'm going to click on cells E8, and up in the corner, the name of the cell is E8, of course, because it's the cross-reference between E and 8. It's also located in the upper left corner right here where it says E8. And so you could go up to that corner and you can actually rename that cell to some other name. In this case, I'm going to rename it to the word total cells, or TS, just to give it a new name. And I'll show you the real value of this. So if I type the letters TS, now the name has to start with a letter, and then you have to hit the enter key when you're finished. So I have to hit the enter key on the keyboard in order to accept it. So now I've got a new cell, and that name is a cell called TS. If I click out of it, there's E10, and there's TS. So now that is no longer E8. E8 still works, but the name is a little more valuable. So if I come down below here and I type the letters TS, and I want to reference that information, I'll say equals TS, hit the enter key, and that actually references that cell. Now the advantage of this is if I come over here and it says equals F8, I can reference that cell too. But when I use my fill handle to fill this down, it's always looking at TS. So TS is basically absolute. If I go to this cell and I drag that one down, it actually moves. So that one's looking at EF8, the escape key. That one's looking at F9. That one's looking at F10. So you see it's moving down. But this one's always going to look at TS every time. So that's one advantage, is that the name is absolute. Now if I jump over to the annual sheet, and I click on any cell, and I say equals TS, it knows that name. And so that will actually be referenced, and you can actually see that information. When you name a specific cell, that's what the end result that you get. Now this name is called a range name, and range represents more than one. So I could actually select the January data, not the totals, but just the January data. I could call that January. Hit the enter key, and that will actually set this name as January. Now if I click on this drop-down arrow, I can actually click January, and it actually highlights that area. I can't actually say equals January like this, because it says I'm taking 4 values and putting them into a single cell. That gives me an error, basically. But if I were to come over and simply said equals sum, and I plug in the January value in here, then it simply knows that January is a range of cells, and it knows that that's the total of that range, which is the same answer as this number here. So you can actually type in a range of information. Now one of the side benefits of this is that I can select an area and say I want that to be a printable area. Let's say, for example, that is cell A1 through D4000 maybe. The first time you select it, you can name it. So I'm going to come to the top here and type print 1. Now you can't have any spaces in this name either. That's one of the other rules. So I call that area print 1. Now if I select the total area, I can call that one print 2 with no spaces. Now if I want to select those areas again, I can click my drop-down arrow, choose print 1, and it highlights that area. So again, the first time I select that area, I would want to highlight it and name it. So I won't have to go select it a second time. If I choose print 2, that highlights the larger area. And so I can actually create different printable areas and name them so I can select them quicker. Now, one problem with this is that if I want to increase this area, so say I want to include that as part of print 1. If I come up and type print 1, hit enter, it says you can't do that because that name has already been used. And so you can't really rename it from this point. So what people end up doing is they end up creating print 1, print 2, print 3, print 4, and they don't really need any of that junk. So we're going to show you how to change the name if you need to. And since this is related to formulas, that we're going to use this to build formulas. To change it, it's in the Formulas tab. So there's an option here called Name Manager, and I'll give you one guess what this is going to do. It's going to manage what? It's going to manage the names. So if I click on the Name Manager, there's the names that I just created. And let's say, for example, we don't need print 2 anymore, so I want to clean it up a little bit. I can delete print 2. And if I want to rename print 1, I can simply click on that, rename the area. I can click on that, delete the information down below here, and then reselect it with the area that I want to include into it. Now I simply say close on this and say, yes, I want to save it. Now the name has been renamed. So we click on print 1 this way. It actually highlights that area that I've changed. So one other thing we're going to be using this for today is for range lookups. So if you've got a database of information that you've downloaded, you can select that information and call it database. And then you can call it whatever you want. You call it table, call it range, call it whatever you want. One thing you got to be careful of, if the name range or database is a reserved name, that could be a problem. So I always put like a number on the back side of it, which will change it. So if I use the word range, I don't know if range is a reserved name. So a lot of times I'll just put a number on the end of it so it differentiates it from the actual reserved names. So we're going to create tables, and we're going to select that table and use that range name as part of the formula. Whenever the formula requires the information, it basically just put in the name, and the system says, I know how to find this information. I can get it out of it. So let me jump back over to Courseware so you see what we just covered. We talked about the name box up in the corner. We talked about some of the rules associated with that. A single cell select, a range of cells we talked about. You can also use a go-to range, which is basically using as a navigation tool. We talked about the name manager a bit, and there's other methods that you can use to actually define the cell. Let's talk about the navigation tool. So essentially, if I go over to the annual sheet and I go to my range name box, choose my drop-down arrow, and I want to go to the January range, I can click on the January range, and it will actually navigate me to that particular field. So no matter where you're at, if you want to jump over to like the print 1 area, it just will navigate you back to that area. There's a couple other features up in the name manager up here that I don't want to use a whole lot, but they could be useful. They could create more junk too. But if I were to select all these cells here, not the totals, just the labels and the data area, and up in this range here, there's a few options here. This one here says create from selection. So I've selected an area, create from selection, and it says, okay, I'm going to use the top row as the name of this field. Say okay. Now we have a whole bunch more names in here. So this gets into the junk world that I said that if you start creating a lot of junk, you need to go back at some point and maybe clean up some stuff. So that's where you go into the name manager, And you can see I don't really need this net profits here, or I don't need total sales. So maybe I'll remove some of these from my list. So you can go back and clean things up a little later using the name manager. The most difficult thing that people need to remember is the name manager. It's kind of in a strange place because a lot of times we're looking at over here, thinking about looking over here for some sort of option. It would be nice if there was a drop down at the bottom and say more options, like a lot of features do, but it doesn't have it here. You have to go to the Formulas ribbon tab and click on the name manager. That's one thing a lot of people forget of how to actually make changes to the names once they get created. Now keep in mind, if you create a database, a large database of information, and you define that range name, if you get new data, you may have more data that fits into the range. So if I had a range like this, and then I added some more names in here, in the list here, then of course that list is going to grow, and the range name will not expand according to that. It would if you actually inserted something. So if I were to come over to 6 here, and right-clicked on 6 and hit insert, and then typed in name. Now, if you go to the range name, choose the January range, it did include that. So it does expand if it needed to, but if you went out to a database and did a database dump, and the database added more stuff on the bottom, it wouldn't expand the range. So then you'll have to go back to the name manager and make those changes. So a lot of times what I'll do is when I do a database, I will select the data, but then I would select a bunch of blank rows below it so that when I added more data, it would actually be part of it. So I can call this my database, database 1 maybe, and that's going to include this data, including a lot of blank lines below it. It doesn't seem to matter if there's no blank, if there's nothing there, it doesn't find anything anyway, so it doesn't seem to be that much of an overhead. But the idea of that is you can select additional lines below it. So we're going to come back to the range name in a little bit. We're going to use this in our formulas and functions. And so this is just sort of giving you a little introduction to this particular command, particular feature. I'm going to go through and delete this range. So we're going to move on. And there's a lot of other capabilities related to the name range, ways you can do things a little automatic. Some useful things. About three-dimensional formulas or 3D formulas. I'll show you how you would add things up across multiple sheets. Three-dimensional formulas. We're going to talk about a referencing, of course. We're going to talk about manual formulas and sum formulas across sheets. So we're talking about capabilities of going across worksheets. So we come back to our range name feature here, and you can see we have an annual sheet. It looks like we have a total sales, and we want to get a summary here of the annual report based on the total of Smith, the total sales of Smith from quarter 1, from quarter 2, from quarter 3, from quarter 4, and we want to put the answer here. So we're going to do this two different ways. We're going to use a sum function and an addition method. The first step is to go back to the annual sheet and press your equal sign. And just like you would do any formula, you would simply press your equal sign, and I would go over to quarter 1, click on cells E4, click, and it actually puts the actual reference of the sheet name along with the cell. Then you use your keyboard and you press the plus sign. Make sure you don't put an equal sign in there. Make sure it's a plus sign. And then we're going to go over to quarter 2, click on E4, click, and then we're going to do the plus sign. Quarter 3, E4, plus, quarter 4, E4. You don't go to annual sheet at this point. You just stop at quarter 4, make sure you have in your formula, you have both the cell reference and the sheet name in each addition equation on top. If it was sheet name or a cell reference is not there, then it simply is going to give you an error message. So if I hit my enter key at this point, it actually puts my total cells in here. Now these cells are all relative, so if I click on this little fill handle here and drag it down, it gives me all the answers for all of them. And you can see I can double click on that and look at each one, hit the escape key, double click, escape, double click, escape. So I can go through each one of those in that manner. Any problems with that? Or sometimes people forget to type something in and then it's a cause a problem. We're going to do it a different way this time. This time we're going to do a sum function. So we're going to come over to the total expenses and we're simply going to click in here and say equals sum with an open parenthesis. So now that we have our open parenthesis, now we're going to go through and add up the total expenses in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. This is a little bit tricky. So the first thing you want to do is type in your equals sum with an open parenthesis, go to quarter 1, and then click on F4. And then you want to hold the shift key on the keyboard, hold the shift key down, and go over to the very bottom of the sheet and click on quarter 4. So if you read the formula, it reads from quarter 1 through quarter 4 at F4. Now if I hit my return right now, then it actually puts that value in there. And I can double click and fill that down. Okay, now we're going to do one more. We'll do the net profits, and we can use either one you want to use. If you had a problem with one of those, you can try that again, and we can get it to work the second time. So I'm going to do the sum function. So I'm going to say equals sum with an open parenthesis. And then I'm going to go over to quarter 1. Choose, I think it's G4. And this is where you hold the shift key down on the keyboard. And you click on quarter 4. And it actually creates a formula that goes sum from quarter 1 through quarter 4 at G4. And I'm just going to hit my enter key. And it puts in this formula in there. And so you can go back and read the formula that you see if you've made a mistake. You can kind of see where your mistake is. Oftentimes on the addition feature, people forget to click on a certain cell. And sometimes they actually click on the annual sheet at the very last of the command. And you don't want to click on the annual sheet because that messes up the formula. So you want to make sure that your formulas are clean, that you're going to go from quarter 1 through quarter 4, and you don't click on the annual sheet when you're all done. You just hit the enter key and it puts the answer in the annual sheet. And so that is a little bit about the three-dimensional formulas. Now these selection that I just did just now, there's a little bit more value to it than what meets the eye. So if you can actually go through and select your sheets. So you see on quarter 1, I have a my exporting against quarter 1. Quarter 2, it's my exporting against quarter 2. And then quarter 3 and quarter 4. So if you actually click on quarter 1, hold the shift key down on your keyboard, click on quarter 4, you see how you have all those highlighted. And then what I can do is I can actually come up to cell A1 and format my exporting goods to be red and make it be a little bit bigger. Now, you just formatted my exporting goods on quarter 1, but because you had all the sheets highlighted, you actually formatted all the sheets at the same time. Now, another thing is maybe you want these things to be evenly spaced out. Maybe quarter 2 is a little bit misaligned. The columns are a little bit wider than quarter 3. And so in order to make sure that they're all evenly spaced out, you can select all 4 sheets and then highlight B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and then move one of the lines to the right, move it to the right a little bit, and it actually evenly spaces them out. Not only did it evenly space out quarter 1, but it also evenly spaced out quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4 in the same manner. Now, if I were to highlight Smith, Brown, Wallace, and Adams in total, and I move one of these lines down a little bit, maybe I want to space them out a little bit so they're not so bunched up together. Now, what did I just change? I actually just changed quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Now, to drop out of this, you simply click on a sheet that is not highlighted. I'll click on the annual sheet, and then you can see that now I have my sheets are evenly spaced out. I don't know how you would do that any other way. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it's very, very tedious to do all sheets and make all the sheets look symmetric. If they are symmetric, you want them to look symmetric. You want them to have the same scaling, you want to have them the same format, the same layout, and some of the same formatting in terms of the labels and things of that nature. And so you can kind of do that all at one time. And that's the real interesting capabilities of that. So there's a little bit more to the selection capability. Now, if I hold my control key down, I can select sporadic ones. So if the sheets aren't actually side by side, then I can use my control key to select multiple sheets throughout the entire thing. So that's kind of a little bit about three-dimensional formulas and manipulating 3 sheets at the same time, 3 or 4 sheets at the same time, using the selection capabilities. Even if I wanted to label these, if I selected 2 of them, I can right-click and I can change the color label this way. Let me go out to a blank sheet now. I don't care where you are, it doesn't matter what sheet you're on. Let's go out to a blank sheet. I'm just going to show you a couple of interesting things about what I call statistical functions. Now, a statistical function is really a sum function is considered statistics. Averages, count, min, max, those are all, it's grabbing a group of data and coming up with some summarization or some sort of aggregate result. But in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to show you a couple interesting things of kind of expanding beyond the standard formulas. So I'm going to put a label in here. Label like this. And I'm going to put a 1, 2, 3, space, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to do a count function to count all of these values. Spell it right. And so I'm going to count these values right here. But we have to kind of predict what we're going to get. So I'm going to say equals count with an open parenthesis. And I'm going to highlight all 8 of these cells. So the question is, what am I going to get when I'm all done? What answer am I going to receive? Now, the reason why this got kind of messed up right here was because these cells are a little bit too close. So if I show you how I can fix that, I'll escape on that. If I were to highlight all these and just sort of space them out a little bit, and then I did my count, then you see that didn't have that same problem. They were just too tight. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it again. I'm going to say equals count and parenthesis. I'm going to highlight all this. I'll do it again. Look at that. Interesting. But anyways, if you hit your enter key, we'll see what answer we're going to get. We got 6. The question is, what did it count? Well, I'm assuming it counted just numbers, just these numbers in here. So if I come into this count function and you type in count A this time, instead of count, we're going to see what we're going to get this time. Hit the enter key. That's 7. So what did it count? Well, if I click on that 7, go to your FX key on the keyboard, formula bar up here, gives you a little help screen based on what the count does. And it tells me this is counting all the numbers of the cells in the range that are not empty. So what it's counting is counting alpha and numbers, not spaces. So if that's a blank space, then it won't count it. So the purpose, what I'm trying to get at here is that there are multiple functions to accomplish very similar results. So whatever formula you're using now may not be the right formula. Maybe you should be using some other related formula. So let's come back out here, go to a blank spot and press FX, and we're going to type the word count in this little search button up here, and we'll say go. That's going to give us a list of all the functions that are related to the word count. So it looks like we have a count blank, a count if, a count IFS, a cube set count, a decount, and there's several others out here, as you can see. And these are all count related. There's count features in these functions here. So you see there's a lot of functions out there. And so sometimes if you're not able to get the right results, you might want to look and see what else is available. If you type in the word sum, S-U-M, and do a search on that, say go to that, there's a lot of sum functions. There's a sum, there's a sum if, there's a sum IFS, there's a sum of product, which is interesting. This is like a sum function, but it actually does multiplication instead of addition. So it's a product of all the values. So if you use this instead, you're going to multiply them all. There's a sum SQ, there's a sum here, there's quite a few sums out there, so you can see. So there's a lot of capabilities out there that uses the word sum. So again, you may be looking at some other capability. Now we're going to be covering a lot of these logical functions, the sum functions and the count functions. And we're going to be using the count ifs, and we're going to be using several other counts throughout the class. Those are logical functions. But the idea of that is that there's just a lot of functions. What I want to do is open your mind to the fact that there's more stuff. And there's a lot of functions out there that you could use. Just kind of keep that in mind as we go through, and we'll start touching on a lot of these. You might want to go back and look and see if there's some other way to accomplish this using a slightly different function. Even when we get into the logical functions, these are sum ifs. These are really cool, so these are very useful. We'll do some count ifs and sum ifs in a little bit. So that is all I'm trying to get at, is just showing you that you do have some capabilities out there. Now, if you click on this little drop down there where it says category, these are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. Is we're going to go through and talk about date and time functions, financial functions, math and trig. We're going to run through a lot of these categories and demonstrate 2 or 3 formulas in each category. Now, we might not cover all the categories, but there's a lot of stuff in the book that covers every category, so that if you wanted to dive into that a little deeper, you can do that. Let's go ahead and move on. So here is our 3-dimensional formulas. Like I have some other functions in here. There's where we talk about statistical functions. That's one of the categories. We talk about the counts and the count A and count blank and max and min and a bunch of other functions. There's also, standard deviation and median and other related statistical related functions.